My father pushed the folder across the dinner table, like he was handing me a menu. "You'll sign tonight," Robert said. "Maya starts managing next month." I stared at him. Then I opened the folder. There it was in black and white. Maya William, managing partner. 30% of clinic profits. Authority over staff, operations, and financial decisions. I looked at my mother. Elaine didn't even flinch. "You've done enough, Jinna," she said. "Your sister deserves an opportunity." "My clinic?" I asked. Robert leaned back. "Our family helped you build it." I almost laughed. Almost. Because I remembered every loan payment, every licensing fee, every 12-hour shift, every night I went home too exhausted to eat. I remembered building that clinic from an empty unit into a place where patients now waited weeks for appointments. And Maya. She had never invested a dime. I closed their contract. No. Dad's expression hardened. Without this family, there would be no clinic. That was when I reached beneath my chair and pulled out my own briefcase. For the first time that night, nobody spoke. I placed a single legal document on the table. Then I opened it to a page I had marked months earlier. I slid it toward Dad. "Before you tell me what I owe this family," I said quietly, "read clause 5.2. Robert's eyes dropped to the page. His fingers stopped moving. And for the first time that evening, my father looked like a man who had just realized he had made a very expensive mistake. The silence around that dinner table wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was dangerous. Because my family thought they had brought documents to take a piece of my clinic. They had no idea I had brought documents of my own. And clause 5.2 was about to change everything. I hadn't always been this prepared. For years, I was the daughter who avoided arguments, swallowed insults, and kept peace even when keeping peace cost me something. My parents knew that about me. They counted on it. They also knew exactly how much I loved my sister. What they didn't understand was that loving Maya had never meant giving her something she hadn't earned. When I first opened the clinic, nobody handed me ownership. Nobody paid my debts. Nobody stood beside me when the bank account hit almost zero. I built it anyway. And over the previous month, something had changed. Maya started asking questions about payroll. Then patient volume. Then supplier costs. Then one afternoon, she casually asked how much the clinic made each month. At the time, I thought she was curious. Now, sitting across from my parents and staring at that contract, I wondered how long they'd been planning this. Because the documents weren't a suggestion. They were already written. Already structured. Already assuming I would surrender 30% of what I had spent years building. And there was one detail I hadn't confronted yet. If this was really just about giving Maya a job, why did she already have a copy of my clinic's financial projections? My father was still staring at clause 5.2 when my mother finally broke the silence. "Why would you bring legal papers to dinner, Jinna?" I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, I hadn't planned to. I had brought the document because I had learned, years earlier, that protecting something valuable sometimes meant preparing for a conversation you hoped would never happen. When I opened my clinic, I had almost nothing. I worked long days, handled the licensing paperwork myself, hired my first employees one by one, and borrowed what I needed to get the doors open. Every dollar carried risk. My parents encouraged me. But encouragement was an investment. They never signed my loans, never paid my clinic's bills, never took on its debts. And Maya hadn't helped either. She had always treated my clinic like something that would eventually belong to the whole family. She used to laugh and say, "You're building this for all of us anyway." I thought she was joking. Then, over the previous month, the questions started. How many patients do you see? How much does payroll cost? What do your suppliers charge? And roughly, how much does the clinic make every month? One afternoon, I finally looked at her. "Why are you asking me all this?" Maya smiled. I'm your sister. Can I be interested? I let it go. Then Dad started saying something different. Not asterisk your clinic. The asterisk family success. Mom began telling me I needed help. You can't carry everything forever, she said. When I asked what she meant, she glanced toward Maya. That's when I began wondering whether this was bigger than a job. But I still didn't imagine 30%. I didn't imagine management authority. And I certainly didn't imagine my parents arriving at dinner with a contract already prepared. Back at the table, I looked directly at Dad. Why does Maya deserve 30%? His answer came without hesitation. Because she's your sister. That isn't an investment. You're being too emotional about money. I pushed the contract back toward him. No, I'm being precise about ownership. Mom shook her head. Jinnah, you're acting like we're strangers. And you're acting like something I built belongs to everyone except me. Nobody spoke. I stood, gathered the documents, and told them the contract would not be signed. Then Dad leaned forward. His voice became quieter. Fine. He tapped the folder once. But if you didn't give Maya those numbers? He looked at me. Then, why did she already have a copy of the clinic's financial projections? The next morning, I unlocked the clinic before sunrise. I expected the familiar quiet, the hum of the reception desk, the faint smell of disinfectant, the first employees arriving with coffee in their hands. Instead, I heard Maya's voice coming from my administrative office. Once I take over operations, we'll probably need to restructure a few things. I stopped walking. 2 senior employees stood inside the office with her. Maya had my financial spreadsheet open on the computer. I stepped through the doorway. Who authorized you to be in here? She turned. Dad said I should start learning the business. You're not managing this clinic. Not yet. That answer stopped me. Not yet. Maya closed the laptop. Mom and Dad said the transition is already decided. Before I could respond, the front doors opened. My parents walked in. Robert was carrying the same folder from dinner. Elaine followed behind him. My staff looked between us. Dad didn't lower his voice. Jinnah's overwhelmed. Maya will be helping with management from now on. One of my employees looked at me. I could see the confusion spreading across the room. I didn't shout. I simply turned to the clinic administrator. Bring me the corporate records and ownership documents. She hesitated, then nodded. A few minutes later, the documents were on the conference table. I opened them in front of everyone. My name, my ownership, my authority. Everything was exactly where it had always been. Then I looked at Maya. You've been given access to staffing information, revenue figures, and internal operations. She crossed her arms. I'm family. That doesn't authorize you. Dad stepped closer. You're humiliating your sister. No, I said. I'm asking who gave her permission. He stared at me. You don't need permission from us to help your own family. I pointed toward the corporate documents. Who told you that you could make decisions for a company you don't own? Dad's jaw tightened. Your mother, and I know how this family works. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about Maya getting experience. They were counting on family pressure to make me surrender control before anyone questioned the paperwork. I turned to Maya. Until your authority is legally established, you don't have access to this office. She slowly walked toward the door. As she passed me, she reached into her pocket. Something metallic touched my palm. A key. I looked down, then back at her. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Dad told me this was already mine. I didn't ask Maya another question. I took the key, put it in my bag, and drove straight to my attorney's office. I placed it on his desk. Then I placed the dinner contract beside it. "This was supposed to give my sister 30% of my clinic," I said. "And this key was given to her because my father told her the clinic was already hers." My attorney read the documents without interrupting. After several minutes, he looked up. "The proposed arrangement can't transfer ownership or profit rights without your authorization." I exhaled. That part I expected. He tapped the contract. "This is what concerns me." He pointed to the financial figures. These numbers weren't public. No. Who had access? I did. My accountant did. A few authorized people inside the clinic. He leaned back. "Then someone gave your family information they weren't supposed to have." That changed the conversation. I went home and started going through old business records. I found emails from months earlier. My father's name appeared repeatedly. He had been asking questions about the clinic's ownership structure. Not once. Several times. Then I found something worse. An email from an employee mentioning that my mother had asked Maya to obtain copies of financial information. I stared at the screen. The questions. The financial projections. The key. The contract. They hadn't suddenly decided at dinner that Maya should get 30%. They had been preparing. Quietly. For months. I returned to my attorney with everything. "Don't confront them emotionally," he said. "Preserve every message, every document, every financial record." I nodded. Then I made the decision I'd been avoiding. I authorized a formal notice stating that no family member had permission to represent the clinic, access confidential records, negotiate on its behalf, or promise anyone ownership. The response from Dad arrived almost immediately. "You have chosen strangers over your own family." I read it once, then put my phone down. My attorney was still examining the dinner folder. Suddenly, he stopped. "Wait." He pulled out another page. It was buried behind the proposed management agreement. His finger moved across the page. "Jinnah." I leaned closer. He was looking at the same clause I'd shown my father. Clause 5.2. I swallowed. They included it. Apparently. He looked at me. "You recognized it the moment you saw their contract because you already knew what it meant." I nodded. My attorney turned the document toward me. Then he said quietly, "Jinnah, Clause 5.2 doesn't just protect your ownership. It proves exactly why your father should have known he had no right to do this." My attorney placed the original clinic agreement beside the contract my parents had brought to dinner. "Look here," he said. Clause 5.2 was clear. No ownership interest, profit-sharing arrangement, management authority, or control over the clinic could be granted to a family member or any other person without my written consent and formal corporate approval. I looked at the dinner contract again. 30% of my profits. Management authority for Maya. Control over staff and operations. All without my signature. My attorney tapped the page. "They weren't just asking you for something you didn't want to give. They were proposing something that conflicted directly with the structure you already established." I sat quietly for a moment. Then I understood why my father had frozen when he read it. He hadn't misunderstood me. He had misunderstood the law. And more importantly, he had assumed my willingness to keep peace meant I would surrender control. I hadn't told my parents about Clause 5.2 when I created the clinic. I never expected to need it against them. But now I did. My attorney prepared the formal notice. No family member had authority to represent the clinic. No family member could access confidential financial records. No family member could negotiate on behalf of the business. And no family member could promise ownership or profit rights that I had never granted. The proposed 30% arrangement was finished before it ever became legally effective. Maya lost the management position she had already assumed was hers. My father had to confront something far more difficult than my refusal. He had to admit that the clinic wasn't the family's property. It was mine. The news traveled through the relatives who had initially believed I was being selfish. Some had heard my parents' version first. They thought I was refusing to help my sister. Then they saw the documents. They saw who owned the clinic. They saw who had carried the financial risk. And they saw that Maya had never invested anything into the business. My mother called me afterward. We were only trying to help the family. I sat at my desk and looked through the clinic window. Help is something you offer, Mom, I said. You don't impose it through legal documents. There was silence. Then she quietly said, Your father didn't think you'd actually refuse. That sentence hurt more than the argument, because it told me they hadn't expected me to have boundaries. They had expected the daughter who always kept the peace. That daughter wasn't coming back. I stopped discussing clinic finances with my family. I tightened access to confidential records. And from that point forward, every position at the clinic would be earned through qualifications, responsibility, and contribution, not because someone happened to share my last name. Maya had to accept that being my sister did not entitle her to 30% of something she had never helped build. My parents had to accept that their relationship with me did not give them authority over my company. And I finally accepted something too. Protecting what I built did not make me selfish. Months later, I sat alone in my office with the same documents my parents had once expected me to sign. The clinic was still mine. The patients were still coming. My staff was still working. And the business I had built from nothing was moving forward, without anyone taking a piece, simply because they were family. I closed the folder. Then I returned to work. They had come to dinner expecting me to give my family 30% of everything I built. Instead, they left knowing that family can share your blood without ever owning the work you sacrificed your life to create.